Mr. Secretary, we lived through the bailouts of 2008 when powerful men lose money. They now want a government bailout. Does the Treasury Department or the various components of the FMOC have the authority to bail out Bitcoin?
Could you please elaborate? What exactly does bail out Bitcoin
Okay,
mean,
could you instruct the banks of this country to buy Bitcoin or change banking regulations so that they are encouraged to do so in terms of the reserves that they're otherwise required to have?
Again, that within the context of asset diversification within banks, they could hold many assets.
Senator Brad Sherman, former chairman of California's Board of Equalization, which once ran the largest state sales tax agency in the country, just cut through the administration's spin on tariffs with a single word: sophistry. Economists may say that when a price jumps 20%, it's a one-time increase, not inflation. But Sherman's answer is blunt. Out in his district, when the price of something goes up 20%, people call that unaffordability. And he exposes the real design behind tariffs on coffee and bananas to make the tax system more regressive, funding tax cuts for billionaires and paying for ICAE. Then Sherman pivots to a question almost no one is asking. Scott Bessent, does the government have the authority to bail out Bitcoin? The answer reveals something remarkable. Watch this. Watch this. But before, if you haven't already, and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button, it goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me.
FSOC has to define what is systemic. I, for one, think that we shouldn't be focusing on the assets, but rather the liabilities. We didn't have a problem in 2008 because the banks had too many assets. We had a problem because they had too many liabilities. So I don't see how most...
Congressman, that's incorrect. Ben Bernanke, then Fed chair, said, could you please tell me what these assets are?
I'm going to reclaim my time. Regardless of that, I'm going to ask you whether you... I'm not going to ask you to agree with me. I'm going to ask you to agree with your predecessor, Secretary Mnuchin. During the first Trump administration, Secretary Mnuchin promulgated interpretive guidance that prioritized an activities-based approach to systemic risk regulation over an entity approach. Secretary Bessent, you have indicated that you want to kick off a review of FSOC's activities and processes. The FSOC Improvement Act, led by my colleague, Dr. Foster, which I've co-sponsored, as you know, would codify an activities-based approach to systemic risk regulation. Does the FSOC plan to revert to the 2019 guidance of the first Trump administration regarding the definition of a SIFI?
Yes, we prefer an activities-based approach rather than an institutional-based approach.
Thank you. I want to pick up on the ranking member's comments about whether tariffs cause inflation. You know, economists can say when the price of something goes up by 20%, that isn't inflation. It's a one-time price increase. But out in my district, when the price of something goes up by 20%, we call that unaffordability. And to say it's not inflation is a sophistry. I'll point out that every time Democrats had and regulations that increased a company's cost, people in this room said that's going to cause inflation. Well, tariffs clearly have to be paid by companies, and if environmental costs are passed through, you can be sure tariffs are passed through. The ranking member asked the question, why a tariff on coffee and bananas? I think the answer is obvious: to make our tax system more regressive. To pay for the big, bad, beautiful bills, cuts in taxes for billionaires, and to fund ICE. I used to head the largest sales tax agency in this country, and we knew the sales tax was regressive, but we knew it would be even more regressive if we imposed sales taxes on food. And that is what you do with a tariff on bananas and coffee. Mr. Secretary, we lived through the bailouts of 2008 when powerful men lose money, they now want a government bailout. Does the Treasury Department or the various components of the FMOC have the authority to bail out Bitcoin?
Could you please elaborate? What exactly does bail out Bitcoin
Okay,
mean,
could you
Congressman? That's a
instruct the
very-
banks of this country to buy Bitcoin, or change banking regulations so that they are encouraged to do so in terms of the reserves that they're otherwise required to have?
Again, that within the context of asset diversification within banks, they could hold many assets.
They can, and there are different, but do you have the authority to order banks to buy Bitcoin or to invest U.S. tax dollars in Bitcoin or Trump coin?
I am Secretary of the Treasury. I do not have the authority to do that, and as Chair of FSOC, I do not have that authority.
So we're not going to see our tax dollars invested in crypto assets?
Well, why would a private bank be your tax dollars, Congressman?
Excuse me, I'm now asking about the money of our taxpayers, which you manage as Secretary of the Treasury. Is it going to be deployed into crypto assets?
We are retaining seized Bitcoin.
That's not exactly taxpayer money. You collect a lot of taxes this month.
No, that is an asset of the U.S.
It's an asset of the U.S.
It was government.
And are you going to invest any?
And I will point out,
Mr. Secretary, reclaiming my time, are you going to invest?
The asset seizure, that $1 billion of Bitcoin was seized, $500 million was retained, and that $500 million has become over $15 billion.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, ranking member of our Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Meeks, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Bessent, if I'm not mistaken, you were working in the financial service industry during the late 1980s, correct?
I was.
Thank you. And well, I'm wondering, do you recall or you're knowledgeable of the Keating 5 scandal back then?
Yes, sir. And I will point out that I was.
I don't want to.
No. I will point out that
limited time. I have limited time.
I identified.
The gentleman is from the Secretary. It's the gentleman from New York's time.
So I just want to make sure that everyone knows who doesn't know that the Keating 5 scandal involved 5 U.S. senators accused of pressuring the Federal Home Loan Bank Board to expedite and give more consideration to the case of Charles Keating, Jr., who ran the California-based Lincoln Savings and Loans. It led to a 14-month investigation unveiling how 5 U.S. senators and staff ended up with more than $1 million in contributions, 4 trips to the Bahamas, and all expenses paid stays at resort hotels. Following the scandal, the industry saw sweeping regulatory changes that was launched by then-President George H.W. Bush. Now, Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you can agree conflicts of interest and improper influence by U.S. elected officials over bank regulators weaken supervisory independence and ultimately impose massive losses on consumers and taxpayers. I think that we can all agree upon that. And as we know, the basic lessons from the post-Keating reforms still applies today when the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, the OCC, is deciding to get a bank charter. I think we can stimulate that. Now, Mr. Bessent, as our nation's treasurer, I'm sure you also know that a foreign-linked investment firm tied to the United Arab Emirates government quietly bought about half of the Trump family's crypto company, World Liberty Financial. And at the very same time, the President of the United States was dealing with that country on foreign policy. Now, Eric Trump, the president's son and co-founder of World Liberty Financial, said, and I quote, "I'm not going to get into who the investors are, but I've got some pretty meaningful investors," end of quote. Lack of transparency. And it didn't end there. When Trump fans brought the tokens, they thought they were getting the deal of a century. But what they didn't know was that only Trump and his sons had the sole power to decide who can sell the token and when. Today, the price of the token has fallen over 50%, And the Trump fans who bought the token are now begging to get out. Now, I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. You can see it for yourself on the World Liberty Financial Discussion Forum. Yeah, yourself, Mr. Secretary. So this is no longer just about a shady crypto deal or a possible gift when a foreign-linked investor is putting hundreds of millions of dollars into a company controlled by the president's family, and at the same time, this president is conducting foreign policy with that country. You know what that creates? It creates a national security concern. So, I'm not going to ask much of you, Mr. Secretary. I just want to know whether you will commit today to pause and heighten the scrutiny of any bank charter or licensing application at the OCC connected to the World Liberty Financial until all of these conflicts of interest and foreign influence reviews are completed and shared with the United States Congress. All I need to know is, will you halt it and do a complete investigation and scrutiny of this licensing application? All you have to ask is yes or no.
No, Congressman.
All you have to ask is yes or no.
OCC is an independent entity, and I would know, Congressman,
I take that as a no.
You traveled to Venezuela to lobby
I take that as a no.
On behalf of
I take that as a no.
On behalf of your
You
donor.
do not want to answer that question. I take that as a no.
For a $7 billion contract.
I'm asking you to do your responsibility as Secretary of the Treasury.
Into a Venezuelan.
You do not.
Mr. Meeks,
Will you?
time has expired.
You cannot erase what you did in 2006.
He's the one that went past your time, Mr. Chairman.
No, and
he did not answer my question, and he wouldn't pass the time.
He had 6 seconds left to try to answer your question, and the
it was a yes or no. It was a yes or no answer. I asked him, will he? No, was that yes or no?
Recognizes the gentleman.
Stop covering for the president.
Let's be absolutely clear about what Brad Sherman just exposed in his questioning of Treasury Secretary Scott Mnuchin. He made 2 arguments that cut straight through the administration's messaging. First, that calling tariff-driven price increases anything other than inflation is wordplay designed to hide a regressive tax on working families. And second, that the government is quietly building a Bitcoin position while the secretary claims no authority to invest taxpayer money in crypto. That expertise is what powers his tariff argument. The administration and its allies have insisted that tariff-driven price increases aren't really inflation, that when the price of something rises 20% because of a tariff, that's a one-time price adjustment rather than the sustained broad-based increase economists define as inflation. Sherman doesn't dispute the technical economics. He reframes the entire debate around what it means to ordinary people out in his district. He says, when the price of something goes up 20%, people don't reach for an economics textbook. They call it unaffordability. And to insist it's not inflation, he says flatly, is sophistry. It's using a technical distinction to dodge the lived reality that families are paying more. Then Sherman exposes the hypocrisy in how these arguments get deployed. He points out that every time Democrats proposed environmental regulations that would raise a company's costs, the very people now waving away tariff concerns warned those regulations would cause inflation. But the logic cuts both ways. If environmental compliance costs get passed through to consumers, as critics always claimed, then tariffs, which companies must also pay, are just as certainly passed through. You can't argue that one type of business cost causes inflation while the other magically doesn't. And then he gets to the design. The ranking member had asked why the administration would impose a tariff on coffee and bananas products. The United States barely grows, and that no domestic industry is being protected by taxing. Sherman's answer is pointed. The purpose is to make the tax system more regressive. Tariffs on everyday staples function as a consumption tax, and consumption taxes hit lower-income families hardest because they spend a larger share of their income on necessities. Drawing on his experience running a sales tax agency, Sherman notes that tax administrators deliberately exempted food from sales taxes precisely because taxing food is the most regressive move available. A tariff on bananas and coffee does exactly what those exemptions were designed to prevent. It taxes food, and the revenue, he argues, funds tax cuts for billionaires and pays for ICE, a tax on the many to benefit the few. The second half of Sherman's questioning turns to crypto. And here he asked something genuinely novel. Having lived through the 2008 bailouts where, as he puts it, powerful men who lose money suddenly want a government rescue, Sherman asks Bessent directly, does the Treasury Department have the authority to bail out Bitcoin? He presses on. What that would mean concretely instructing banks to buy Bitcoin or changing banking regulations to encourage them to hold it against their reserve requirements. Bessent says that within the context of asset diversification, banks could hold many assets. Sherman sharpens it. Does Bessent have the authority to order banks to buy Bitcoin or to invest US tax dollars in Bitcoin or in Trump coin? Bessent says, no, as Secretary of the Treasury and as chair of the relevant Oversight Council, he does not have that authority. But Sherman catches the gap between that clean denial and what's actually happening when he asks whether taxpayer money will be deployed into crypto. Bessent volunteers that the government is retaining seized Bitcoin. Sherman probes it, and Bessent lays out the numbers. Roughly 1 billion in Bitcoin was seized. About 500 million was retained rather than sold, and that retained holding has since ballooned to over $15 billion in value. Bessent's framing is that this is an asset of the United States, not an investment of taxpayer money. But Sherman's point stands. The government is now sitting on a massive volatile crypto position, and the line between retaining a seized asset and holding a speculative investment with public exposure is thinner than the Secretary suggests. If that $15 billion position were to collapse, the public bears the loss. Whatever you call it, the through line of Sherman's questioning is a tax expert's insistence on calling things what they are. A tariff on food is a regressive consumption tax, no matter how it's labeled. A 20% price hike is unaffordability, no matter what the economists call it. And a $15 billion government crypto holding is public exposure to a volatile asset, no matter how carefully it's described as merely retaining what was seized. Sherman's expertise lets him strip away the vocabulary that obscures who benefits and who pays. And in every case, the answer points the same direction. You are watching David Brooke, and if you want to support that as always, you can hit that subscribe button. Leave a like on this video. If you stuck around at the end, drop a blue heart in the comments, and until next time, I'll see you soon.